Looking into cultural heritage through the handprint care, we started to ask questions like, how did the land taming and the seasonal migration develop side by side as sustainability practices? And how do they create and sustain these cultural landscapes in southern Africa? Well, communal hunting and management of grasslands with fire served to both thin out the woodland into savanna and also to restrict the range of the tsetse fly to low-veld areas. These social ecological practices created habitable landscapes where cattle and people could thrive on the uplands in the wet summer months. And in the dry winter months, it was possible to move cattle to the low-veld pastures as the Nagana cattle disease retreated with the drier conditions. Now, the seasonal movement of cattle was evident, for example, in the Bokoni, on the escarpments of the Mpumalanga. Later, the Zulu homesteads south of that area were also able to reach down into the bushveld habitats and to change these. And if you look at a place like Shlushlue today, the woodland is returning after having been grasslands during the Zulu period, and prior to that having been woodland. So the landscape have transformed, and if you look further now south amongst the Xhosa, you had the Xhosa migrating to the Zuurveld in the drought years, where the sweetveld summer pastures could not support their cattle numbers. So there's a rich array of heritage. And these notable examples all illustrate how seasonal migration developed in ways that both created and maintained the cultural landscapes of Southern Africa over hundreds of years of habitat change. Now, we could take this into the curriculum topics around sustaining landscapes and also around heritage practices to mitigate disease. So the Sustainable Development Goals can be a starting point for tuning in around a real story, like the diary of Magema Fuze, who was one of the first people to write a book in Zulu, describes how buffalo were sighted in his journal. He wrote down while they were traveling in an ox cart near Ishowe. He reports how he made a small fire with grass and dung to make it smoke on the oxen so that they would not get the Nagana cattle disease. And of course, he was traveling with Bishop Kalenzo, so he explained this practice to Bishop Kalenzo, who appeared to respect the practice of his students, but he did not write anything about it in his own diary, as he probably didn't believe it. Today, scientists have shown how tsetse fly and wild animals move away from the smell of smoke. So you can do a certain amount of uncovering and recovery of indigenous knowledge. Similarly with cholera, which came to East and Southern Africa from the coastal estuaries of India. When people traveled to the coast to trade or to hunt and collect seafoods in the winter months, they would bring back the disease home. People traveling away from a village would always wash their hands when entering a village or on their return. This practice served to protect the villagers from cholera as a hand-to-hand and hand-to-mouth disease. So both these practices of migration and care were really important, and it's possible now to find out, do people always wash their hands when they return home and before preparing food? Also, to work out what can we learn from these practices to mitigate COVID-19 and other diseases today? And what daily actions are necessary if we are to control the spread of diseases in pandemic conditions? And can we simply stop when the disease recedes? So working from indigenous practices in the past into the concerns that we're facing in the everyday brings a rich array of ideas and practices that we can debate and we can try out and we can see the sense of as we are confronted by the pandemic of COVID that we're just working through to the end of, we hope, at the moment. And here's some reference in the resources that might be useful.